Hey YouTube, it's Faye, and for today's video, we're going to be replacing the water pump on our second generation Toyota Tacoma with the 4-liter engine.
I listed all the tools that you need to complete this job in the description of this video, so let's hop right into the work. We're going to start by draining the coolant on a cold engine, of course, which you can do either by opening the drain at the bottom of the radiator, or by removing the lower radiator hose. Now you can choose to either leave the skid plate on, which may make things a little bit messy, or you can remove it. You can also attach a hose to the radiator drain through the hole in the OE skid plate for an ultimate life hack. Now I didn't bother with the block drains because they can be a pain to get to, and you're gonna lose a little coolant from the water pump regardless of whether you drain the block or not, so to me it's not worth the extra hassle for the added benefit here. There are 9 trim clips that hold this upper air duct into place, so remove them with a trim clip tool or by taking 2 pocket screwdrivers to the slots on either side and pulling up that inner portion. Now if you break them, don't feel bad, we all do, so I linked replacements in the description of this video. Next, disconnect the small hose from the coolant overflow tank. Now let's remove the engine cover. It comes off easily by removing these 2 10mm nuts, and then it just pulls right off. Now we're going to tackle the fan, and these nuts are a challenge to remove. You may think at first that they are reverse thread, but they're not. They're just on there really tight. The trick is to use 2 12mm wrenches, one to hold the fan still. You can see that I'm jamming it here up against the thermostat housing, which yes is plastic, but I've never broken one by doing this, and I'm going to be replacing the thermostat later on today anyway, so even if I did crack this, it's not going to be a problem, but like I said, never had any issues. But if you're concerned, you can also put some cardboard or a rag in between the wrench and the housing to help disperse that pressure that the wrench is applying there. Now crack the nuts loose 2 at a time and then rotate the fan so you can reach the other 2. So you want to crack all 4 loose first, then you can go ahead and remove them. I like to use the close end of the wrench to loosen them because you don't want to round off any of these nuts here or your life will be absolutely miserable. Now I'm releasing tension on the serpentine belt and removing it. If you don't have a belt routing diagram, here it is on the screen right now for you to screenshot. I like to remove the belt at this point kind of out of habit because it makes it easier for me sometimes to remove the fan and the water pump pulley. But if it's easier for you to reach, you can also remove it after the fan is off. After my belt is loose, I'm going to separate the mechanical fan from the water pump pulley. This is also really tight, so I begin by using a little resonant frequency and smacking the side of the base of the mechanical fan mount with my ball peen hammer. And it is okay if you hit the studs here because we are replacing the water pump today, and the new water pump comes with new studs pre-installed. Once the fan is broken free, I like to use a flathead screwdriver to gently pry around the base of the fan mount. Make sure to rotate it constantly so that you're pulling it off evenly and you don't end up wedging the base crooked onto the water pump studs. Now once the fan is loose, you can set it gently inside of that shroud because we're going to be removing these 2 together. Remove the 2 10mm bolts holding the shroud to the radiator. Unclip the transmission cooler lines from the shroud and remove the fan and the shroud together as a unit. Next, we will disconnect the 2 radiator hoses, one from the water pump and one from the thermostat housing. And I highly recommend a pair of these hose clamp pliers like I linked in the description, but regular pliers can work in a pinch. If your hoses are difficult to remove, you can also use a hose pick tool like this one that I'm demonstrating here. Now, you will also see that I removed the radiator in this video, and that's because I upgraded it at the same time to overlap my labor. And if you're interested in doing that as well, I linked that video in the description. But if you're gonna leave your radiator in place, I think it's a really good idea to place something like a piece of cardboard in front of the radiator to prevent any damage from happening to the fins while you're swinging tools around in there. Now remove that drive belt and water pump pulley. And here you can see the water bypass hoses that I'm going to be replacing today. These should be nice and firm, and you can see that these have gotten soft over the past 190,000 miles, so I'm performing some preventative maintenance. I would hate for one of these to burst when we're out in the middle of the desert. Some of the places that we like to go are pretty remote. So while I'm in here, I'm going to remove and replace every single one of these, starting by detaching all 5 of them from where they connect to the water inlet housing. I'm using a combination of different pliers here. I've got hose pliers, 90-degree pliers, and these regular, I don't know what you call them, gear wrench pliers to remove these. And now the larger one on the bottom will leak some coolant if you didn't drain the block, but you can see this is not a big deal. Don't forget that hose number 5 is hiding in the back here. And I'm also unplugging the throttle position sensor connector now so you can see what I'm doing back here a little bit better, but this is going to be coming off soon anyway so I can get to the other side of these hoses. Now I'm removing the 3 10mm nuts, securing the plastic thermostat housing to the water inlet. I'm threading them back on to keep from losing them later on, and now let's remove these 5 10mm bolts that hold the water inlet onto the front of the engine. The 2 lower ones are a little bit tricky to see, so I'll point these out to you. Once you've got those off, remove the water neck with a side-to-side motion to get past that rubber O-ring that it's stuck on. And here are the bolt locations with the inlet removed, which is a little bit easier to see. All of these bolts are the same length, so don't worry about keeping track of which ones went where. And while I'm in here, surprise, surprise, I'm performing some more preventative maintenance. These pulleys are okay. I mean, they're not making any noise, they roll smoothly, but they're a little bit old. Normally the bearings shouldn't have any side-to-side play, and when you spin them, they should move smoothly, but also come to a stop pretty quickly, as the bearings are packed with grease inside, and that will slow them down. If they roll a little bit too freely and take a while to come to a stop, that's actually a sign that they have lost grease, which isn't the end of the world, but it just means that they're wearing out. I have all 4 of these linked below in the description of this video if you want to replace these as well today. The tensioner bolt is left-hand thread, like you'll find on most Toyotas, and you can tell because the bolt is labeled with an L. Now that these are out of the way, let's remove the water pump. Please note that there are a couple different sizes of fasteners used here, one with a 10mm head, another with a 12mm head. These two are also different lengths, but the same lengths as each other. Keep track of how you remove them. I recommend using the new water pump as your bolt holder, or you could also make yourself a cardboard template to stay organized. But really, this image that I have on the screen right now will probably be all you need. Check this out, you can see that there is some Toyota form-in-place gasket on the end of these longer bolts, so we'll make sure to clean these thoroughly before we reinstall them with the new sealant. Here are all the bolts, and you can see that all the 10mm bolts are the same length, and all the 12mm bolts are the same length. And here is the old water pump and gasket. Nope, it had absolutely nothing wrong with it. Here are the 2 O-rings I will be replacing today. I bought all of these parts from the dealership, but I will link the genuine Toyota parts in the description below. Let's get this first one installed. I'm using my 90-degree pick to remove the old O-ring from the upper coolant pipe and clean off any corrosion or coolant crusties with a little piece of Scotch brite pad. I also lubed up the new O-ring with a little seal glide before installation. Now I'm prepping my water pump bolts by getting all this old gasket material off of the threads. So this is the Toyota form-in-place gasket that we're going to be installing on those longer bolts. Now once you apply this, you have 15 minutes to install them before this formula starts to cure. So I tend to apply this at the very last minute.
And all we need is just a very little bit on the tip here.
I also clean the sealing surface for the water pump as well, but with a rag only. No Scotch Brite or razor blades here with the metal gasket style. I always start by installing the water pump loosely with all the 10mm bolts first to hold it in place, since these don't require any form-in-place gasket. This ensures that my holes are lined up and the gasket is held into place. Once again, check out this diagram from the factory service manual if you need help figuring out where the bolts go. And I also listed the torque spec here. The torque for the 10mm bolts is 80 inch-pounds and the 12mm bolts are 17 foot-pounds. And I'm torquing them in kind of a modified star pattern here. So check this out, you can see I have a bunch of new coolant hoses going on right here. And actually in order to see all of these and replace these really easily, I just removed this upper intake plenum. And in order to do that, we've got 2 10mm bolts. We've got one right here and one right here. We have another 10mm right here that's gonna detach the air intake box from the throttle body. I did remove this connector right here, another electrical connector right here for the mass airflow sensor. And then most importantly, when you're removing this, just make sure that on the back side, there is this little vacuum hose, which you can see I haven't reconnected just yet. That goes to the fuel pressure regulator. When you're pulling this off, quite often you will break this nipple. So just be really, really, really careful and make sure that you undo this from the fuel pressure regulator if you can, or right here, just give it a little twist and get that right off. I just set it aside and I even just leave that hose attached. But importantly, back here, that is the fuel pressure regulator and that's where that vacuum hose is gonna go. So just make sure. So now that everything is out in the open, we can see how much easier it is to replace these hoses when you can access everything. So there's 5 total that I replaced. This large one right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is this one down here. All of those little coolant bypass hoses are brand new. Before reinstalling our water outlet, we're gonna clean this surface right here with just a little bit of Scotch Brite. We just obviously don't want to take off anything except for any corrosion there because that is the sealing surface. You can see it's got a little bit of corrosion. So we're just gonna go ahead and clean that off.
and then also the inside of here, because we've got an O-ring that's gonna sit here and the O-ring that's gonna sit here. There's how everything looks, nice and clean. It looks beautiful and nice and smooth. And now I'm gonna go ahead and apply a little lube. You can also, if you don't have this sort of lube, you wanna make sure that whatever you're using is safe for use on rubber though, because sometimes you can use a type of lube that will actually like make the rubber swell, and you don't want that. So if you don't have something like that, a good rule of thumb is you can also lube with whatever substance is gonna be on the material. So in this case, you can use coolant. Just put a little coolant in here. Think about it, coolant is totally slippery. But in this case, I'm just gonna put a little bit of lube here. Not like nothing crazy, just on the surface. And it also helps to do a final clean as well. More importantly though, we're gonna put lube in here. Yeah, just so we don't rip that O-ring or mess it up when we're installing that for sure. And I've got a little bit of that silicone paste I'm just gonna put on this O-ring. I'm also gonna install this O-ring, also with a little bit of lube just so that it sticks and it doesn't fall out while I'm installing it.
Now it's time to reinstall the water inlet. I'm sneaking that rearmost coolant bypass hose on by getting my fingers behind the hose clamp for leverage, and here are my 5 10mm bolts. Going back together here is pretty much just a reverse of removal, but we're gonna go through every step anyway. Why not?
Here in the factory repair manual, we can see the location of all those bolts. And here is the torque spec. We're only doing it 80 inch-pounds. Oh my gosh, so small. So just make sure that you don't over torque that. Next, let's connect those 5 water bypass hoses. There we go, all 5. This one in the back, 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 5. Now let's get our thermostat housing installed. So here is the new thermostat, genuine Toyota. There's the part number.
Let's remove these 10mm nuts that I strategically placed where I couldn't possibly lose them, and sandwich this thermostat housing in between them on these studs. The torque spec for these is 80 inch-pounds.
Now I spun all of these when they were on the truck, and I was just looking for any feelings of excessive looseness in the bearing or grittiness. And I did not notice any sound being made, and that's typically the first thing that you're gonna notice when any of these pulleys go bad. The reason why I'm replacing these is because I've been researching a lot on the supercharger kit lately, and it seems like the only failure people have had at all are just like their old pulleys, and that's like, it has nothing to do with the supercharger either. It's just like neglect. So I'm just like, well, while the belt is off, I'm just gonna replace these. Everything's apart. It's so easy to replace them now, so why not just save myself the hassle later on? So let's grab the new ones. I'm going to replace all of my idler pulleys. You can see that when I ordered them, I got 2 that are identical and 1 that is different, so I'll show you where all those go. And I also got the tensioner as well, and that makes up all 4 of our pulleys. And there's the part number for the tensioner. So if you look at our diagram here, you can see we've got 2 idler number 2s, 1 idler number 1, and then the tensioner itself. So 4 little rollers total. So we're just gonna swap over this bowl and washer. I am gonna clean up the bottom of that washer a little bit. Okay, there we go, nothing crazy. Do the same for the other one. Get that installed. And the torque spec for both of these is 29 foot-pounds.
So these guys are my 2 number 2 idlers according to the factory service manual. And now let's get the idler number 1 down at the bottom next to the AC compressor. There's the old and the new side by side. And prior to install, I just cleaned off a little bit of dirt and mud that had caked itself onto the bottom of the block here. This idler has the same torque spec of 29 foot-pounds. I did find it easier to reach this pulley from the bottom, but if you have longer arms than me, you can probably get it from the top as well.
Now this is the entire tensioner assembly, and I'm not going to be replacing this today. Heck no. What I am going to do though is swap over the pulleys, and I'm going to keep this tensioner for another time. Maybe I'll do it when we have to replace the AC compressor or something like that.
So all I did was remove it from the bracket, and now I'm installing just the pulley onto the old bracket. The tensioner itself was in great shape. I didn't hear any belt slipping or noise at all prior to this job, so just the pulley replacement at this point is fine. Remember, this is reverse thread.
as I'm rotating the torque wrench in order to torque that pulley into place, you're seeing that I'm also moving the tensioner. So this is perfect. It's gonna basically solve two problems at once. I want to, here's my new tensioner but old pulley. What I wanna do, as I'm tightening this to torque it, it's gonna bring this part of the tensioner around, and I wanna line up this hole with this slot. And that's gonna keep it tensioned and keep this pulley out of the way so that I can put the drive belt back on. So I've got this little 5/32 Allen wrench here, and that fits in there and also in there. You can do anything. You can do a little screwdriver as long as you have enough room for it. So I'm gonna start torquing this bolt, spin this around, and then insert this. So then I can finish torquing this bolt right here, and then I'll lock the tensioner in place, and then I'll be able to install the drive belt. So let's do this.
Oh, the power steering hose is in the way.
There we go.
Okay, so you can see my little Allen wrench there is in place, and the tensioner is definitely stuck in the loosest position right now. So it's locked in place, so we're gonna torque this.
Here we go, 29 foot-pounds. So now we'll install the water pump pulley. There we go. And for the sake of installing the drive belt, we're just gonna temporarily install a couple of these nuts here because we want the drive belt on before the fan, and then we're gonna put the fan on after that. So there we go. You can use your old drive belt or replace it. This is the brand new one with the part number. I'll link that in the description below as well. So let's get this on. And I'm a weirdo, but I like the words to face me. And one thing I like to do is make sure that I install the belt over the ribbed pulleys with the big lips first, because those are going to be the hardest to get over once the belt has a lot of tension on it. So we'll normally put it over the smooth tensioner pulley last, but whichever way works for you. There's really, no right or wrong way to do this. But we'll just start with the power steering over here. And then we're going to go up over the water pump. And then this side, we've got the smooth side going over this idler, and then the ribbed side is going over the water pump. Perfect. Smooth side over the other idler there. Ribbed side over the generator. Going around the AC compressor. Idler. Crank pulley. There we go. Getting it over the ribs. And then the last one. See how you can just sort of slip it back over the tensioner there? And we just make sure everyone's in their grooves, and it looks like it. So there we go. Power steering, idler, up under the water pump, over there the tensioner, down around to the crank pulley, little idler, up over the AC, over the generator or alternator, here to our other idler, and back up over the water pump. And there we go, and it's loose still, so now we're gonna release tension on our tensioner pulley there, and we're gonna pull out our little tool that's holding the tensioner into place.
Now let's remove these nuts and install our fan and the shroud. You may have noticed that a new radiator has magically appeared, so some time has elapsed. Once again, I'm installing the fan and the shroud together as a unit, hanging the fan on the water pump studs and hand tightening a couple of nuts, then securing the shroud to the radiator by sliding these two brackets into place at the bottom. This CSF radiator features bolts on the bottom brackets, which the OE does not, so in my case, I'll be tightening those two, but you can just worry about tightening the two 10mm bolts up on top of the shroud. Then don't forget to clip these two transmission cooler lines back into that little fastener on the bottom driver's side of the fan shroud.
So now as we're tightening those nuts that go from the mechanical fan to the water pump pulley, you can see I've got my long box end wrench. I love this one. Both sides are enclosed. This one's a 14 and that one's a 12. So as you can imagine, I use this on a lot of Toyotas. So I've got it on one of those bolts, and you can see that I've got it wedged along the metal part there. I'll be able to get a wrench on the other side and tighten each one of these. Yes, I know they're impossible to remove, but look, 16 foot-pounds. That's all we're doing, you guys, so.
I'm going around and tightening them all snug first to seat the fan evenly, then do my final tighten. Don't hate me, but I didn't use a torque wrench here. I just used my calibrated wrists. But I promise, it's fine. I filmed this video half a year ago and it hasn't fallen off yet. All right, let's get the overflow hose back on, reinstall our radiator hoses, and get that intake back on. I tighten it down with those two 10mm bolts, being sure to connect the vacuum hose for the fuel pressure regulator in the back, plugging back in our mass airflow sensor and throttle position sensor connectors, and tightening those hose clamps. Lastly, we have our engine cover and these two 10mm nuts and the air duct that sits on top of the radiator with those 9 trim clips. And that wraps up the water pump, thermostat, drive belt, pulleys, and the water bypass hose installation. Now, all we have left is filling and bleeding the coolant. I do have a whole video dedicated just to filling and burping the cooling system of these vehicles, so I'm not going to go through that again here and be repetitive, but if you'd still like to see me go through the step-by-step procedure of how I perform that job on this truck, then
go ahead and click on my radiator removal and replacement tutorial, and that'll bring you through the last little bit that you're going to need to complete this job. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye!